the research support website. And Joyce, would you like questions to be put into the chat, and will you answer it later,
I
or are you
think
happy to just...
it's difficult for me while I present. I think what you should do is maybe somebody can read them out. I just want to get, so you've already put it on. So the one we have here is the one you're sharing.
Yes.
Okay. Because if with the chat, I don't always see the chat.
No
so,
problem. So Joyce, Jackie has been very kind to say she will be checking the chat, because I also can't see the chat properly on my side. So Jackie will read out if there's any questions that come up. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. After all this fuss happening, just what we're going to address today. What is a rating, in a rating? Why should you apply for a rating? Who can apply for a rating? A little bit on the time frames, the rating categories. It's very important that you can visualize where you fit in. Then the role players involved, and then the rating process itself, and what is the sources you should use when you start preparing an application. And that will also show some critical success factors. And then what there is a rating guideline document called the 7 steps. And the initial reaction was that we hope the 7 steps doesn't lead to 12 steps. So this is, but at least it exists. It was previously not in such a format. So what is the NRF rating? It's basically an assessment of your recent research track record. 2 key words there: recent, it's the past 8 years, and research track record. This is an evaluation of your research profile, although your other tasks like community outreach and teaching forms part of your academic. This one is the one that focuses on your research track record, and it includes your supervision of postgraduate students. It's about the quality and impacts of your research outputs. Based on that, your relative standing judged by peers, based on the quality and impact of your research outputs. Centimetric, bibliometric data, it's often asked, how do we use it? At one stage in the past, we were thinking, due to the huge social cost of getting peer reviewers, that we should maybe make one of the reports, this should be represented by scientometric or bibliometric data. But it soon was seen that it is so discipline specific, it is so dependent on where in your career profile you are. Whether you work in huge teams, whether you work on your own. So it was definitely said we cannot use it in place of a report. So it is seen as supportive information at the moment, and it's mostly used by reviewers to actually support statements and to make points, motivate and substantiate them. So although we do not use it as it's not a key feature in any key way, it is definitely, because I think we cannot get away from the world of scientometrics and bibliometric data. It's actually, but we realize it is discipline specific, and the way it is used is very much dependent on the specific discipline. The system is based on international peer review. Often it's said that if you or have a C, you are locally established. You are not locally established, you are established per the criteria set for any researcher on the global, so there's not local South African research and international research. The global research, they all are the same thing. You are a researcher in America and you're a researcher in England and in Africa, and in South Africa it's the same criteria used. We use approximately 5,000 reports, of which about 60% of them are peers based outside South Africa, to rate on average 800 applicants. I'm very proud to say it's a system run by South African scholars, for South African scholars. The NRF and the support staff everywhere is there to support, to not to make decisions, but the decisions is made by academics. Who sits on the specialist committees, who apply, and the peer reviewers are all academics. We currently have about 4,200 rated researchers. Some 8,800 was rated since the system started in 1984. The growth was in 2007 when I started. we were just short of 1,700 and we are now at 4,200. So it's a good growth. And the interesting thing is that the growth is mostly in the categories of the Y and the C. So if our A's and B's growth had grown with the system, it would have told us that our system is not really globally benchmarked. So the growth is in the right categories, and it shows that our system is internationally benchmarked. We know science is a developing thing, research environment changes constantly. We do have an annual policy workshop where, based on the experiences of the past round, the chairpersons and the conveners bring some issues that affect everybody in the recent round, to make policy changes to how we deal. So all our rating guidelines and documents, they are regularly updated. And I can just imagine this year's policy workshop there with COVID. I'm sure it's going to be an interesting one, because that is definitely going to impact on the researcher environment. Why should you apply for a rating? I know there is some incentive funding still attached to it, but the incentive funding system is no longer the same as in the past. Instead of every year for 5 years getting the same amount, you now get once when you a once-off amount in which you can decide how to use it. But I think the more value is that in benchmarking. Emerging researchers, it helps them with career planning. The feedback they get is from peers all over the world, and it's, I think, a very good thing for young researchers to get that level of feedback. I don't think you will be, even with the most money in the world, be able to get such good feedback. Also for career planning, I think it helps them to also make an assessment of where they are and where they want to go to. Filling in the form in itself is a good experience. Established researchers who has gone through the process, it helps them to know they must maintain once they're rated, they are going to be invited within 5 years' time to get rated again. The feedback they have hopefully provide them with some information. How are they going to get improve their levels of research excellence? And also, I think an important thing is it gives them a time to pause to when you have to write up your application. When you do write up the more qualitative assessments, the narrative fields, ongoing, where are you going to, what is your self-assessment, it makes you think a bit. And I think in essence, it gives you a bit of more of a longer time horizon for planning. The use of ratings in higher education institutions for recruitment purposes, promotions, marketing, bragging rights, training. But I think the most important one is the training of the next generation of researchers, namely the postgraduate students. It's always, I think, reassuring to know that if your postgraduate students are supervised by rated researchers, you know that they are acknowledged and benchmarked against global norms. There's also in our RE mandate intention to grow value recognition of rating in NRE funding decisions. Often happens that chairs get reviewed 5 years, and then the same time the person gets reevaluated, and often the same reviewers are used, and we do think it might be, we plan to have that waste of resources to make it less cumbersome. Okay, eligibility types, important thing. These two, yes.
Sorry, Joyce, there's a question before you move on. It's a question from Reggie. He's saying there are practitioners that are researchers who influence practice. Why can we not use practitioners as evaluators?
Okay, practitioners is an interesting concept, and a lot of people actually, the places where you get practitioners mostly is often in the medical field. You get practitioners in the social sciences and social work. You get practitioners in a couple of fields. But research is basically building on new knowledge. So new knowledge means that if you practice only and you do service delivery, it does not really mean the 5 criteria of being rated researchers in the C category is you must have a body of quality work. So it's a quantity. A quality is both the work as well as your supervision, on your the outlets where you publish. It must be delivered in a sustainable way. It must be there must be some coherence in what you're doing. And this is often one of the things. If you do practitioner work and you do contract work, you often don't really have your own focus. You actually have to do what others tell you to do. So a lot of researchers are actually also practitioners. You will notice in some of the documents that will come further on, there will be when different fields are different, have different ways. So if you are, for instance, in social work, some of your outputs might be policy documents, things that influence policy, so which is very much also practitioner based. So it is not excluded that if you are solely a practitioner, you can be a researcher as well. So, but if you are, so that's very field dependent as well. I'm not sure whether maybe later on we can address that again to hear whether Rajen's question has been answered. So there's no anybody that is, so if you look at this slide, the people that can apply are permanently employed researchers, academics. If you are in an academic department, then you are technically already eligible to apply. Then if you are on a contract, and there are 2 categories there, dual appointees, where a person has a appointment with one of them must be a South African higher education institution or one of the NRF recognized institutions. The other one might be industry locally or another non-NRF recognized institution or international. Often you have people that are they come here but to train students and but there's a firm, there's not just a loose arrangement. The same goes for retired academics who might be emeriti or honorary appointees, research associate fellows. I think the postdocs even fall in here. For all these people that are on fixed contracts, there must be, we do not work on a designation, we work on institutional commitment that is made by the applicant, and that is forwarded to the DAs, and they must confirm it, that there is benefit in terms of capacity building and postgraduate student supervision, so that when the person must make the case, and there must be some commitment to maintain association or researchers to be appointed. All these last categories will be, there must be motivation. We do not want, what often happens, for instance, with postdocs is that they apply and there's good support, because postdocs often are appointed on soft money. So, and they might actually just start, they're not, but for them, the issue is to get a position. They have to prove that they actually are researchers. So they always, I think, most of them are the ones in the postdoc area are ones that want to apply for a permanent position. And if they know that to improve their chances if they got a Y rating. So the motivations are there. So these are the technical criteria. So there's 2 types or 4 types of applications. You can be new, you've never submitted one. If you submitted an application that was not successful, then you have to wait 3 years. If you have chosen not to accept the re-evaluation by invitation in your 5th year, you might have it lapsed, but we don't formally invite you, but you can decide whenever you have to apply again. And then we get special early re-evaluations, but for them also we need a motivation. So Rajen's question, to a certain aspect, is technical eligibility and then scientific eligibility. So technically, there's nothing that makes you, if you're involved with work that is practice-based. So I think we will later see if we can address that further. Time frames, if your rating is successful, it is valid for 6 years. For instance, this cohort or the next year, or the people who want to apply now will be evaluated in 2021. And the rating becomes valid the 1st of January, and it's valid until the 31 December 2027. These cohort will be invited to reapply in their 5th year, 2026. And the period under review for this people who's going to apply for 2021 will be 1 January 2014 to December 31, 2020. Whenever our meetings are held more or less the September onwards. The results is normally available if you have a good PO within a day or two, but our norm is no, it should not take longer than 10 days, but it's only the outcome. The feedback is sent a bit later on. Our call opened on 30 September this year, but I think one of the issues is that even if you don't apply this year or you keep this CV section that you need on NRF Online that you can update at any time. The CV is about 90% content-wise of the application, not necessarily weight-wise in terms of importance, but you can update your CV all the time. Our meeting dates and panel members' names are posted on the website. It was a bit difficult last year. We had meetings up till the 18th of December, but we will update it soon because there is a couple still to be held in February. But hopefully this year it will go better and the panel members and meeting dates will be posted earlier.
I'm sorry, Joyce, just a correction. The period under the review is from 1st January 2013 to 31st December 2020. That's fine.
Okay, 2030. I'm so sorry. I actually was changing things here. So the December 20, yeah, no, then before we distribute this, let's just make sure that I fix this. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out, Roshan. It's because I use previous years, I dust them often, and sometimes you miss a thing like that. My sincere apologies. Can we proceed? Okay, the categories, where do you fit in? I'm going to, in one of my next slides, talk about what we call the benchmarking methodology. But basically, you get two broad categories, established and emerging. And then you get a category which is almost like one on its own. It's neither established nor emerging, and that's the P category. It is people that is 35 years or more or less around. PhD 5 years ago, and they are already, people don't see them as, they are still developing, they're already having an international presence, and they are going to be they are seen as the future A's. Then you have the established researchers, which we'll talk next slide. The B's are the established researchers with considerable international recognition. There is a document that actually says for this field, this is what considerable international recognition means. And the A's are leading international scholars. They are almost like, you know, this person is leading the pack in this field. Broad, some fields very broad, some fields less, but they are seen as leaders in the field. And for the emerging category, they must have a doctorate obtained no more than 5 years ago, and at the closing date be 40 years of age or younger. This is something we are actually trying to revise, this whole age thing, but it will, with COVID, actually all our progress with that was halted in 2020. Next slide, please. Okay, the benchmarking methodology, what a C category is the stipend which all the other categories are based on. The criteria there is a sustained recent record, quality, outlets both of both the outlets and the research itself, the ability to conceptualize, be independent, not always just a support person, using cutting edge research methods, and this ongoing engagement with the field. They should be used as the reference point at which researchers are assessed. So C is established. If you are established and you have considerable international recognition, you are in the B category, the B category, internationally recognized researchers with considerable international recognition. And to a certain extent, it's more or less probably the CIR on the continent, the highest level, plus global leadership is A. For the emerging researchers, it is the potential to become a C in 5 years' time. And the P are the mini A, so they kind of like I said, a bit on their own. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit of how the pyramid works. It just illustrates how, also in terms of number, it's more or less the same in this pyramid. Next slide, please. And here for the emerging and P categories, P's are the mini A's, Y's are Y1s is quite a achievement. It's people that's often very almost on the cusp of being a P. So they're seen as the mini B's, and the Y2s are the C's in 5 years' time, but they also build on each other. And there's nothing to say that the Y2 will not become an A. It is just probably career trajectory based on history that is represented here. Next slide. Okay, the definitions of a C is, once, as I said, it's an established researcher with a sustained recent record of productivity in the field, who are recognized by their peers as having produced a body of quality work, the core of which has coherence and attests to ongoing engagement with the field, and demonstrated the ability and to conceptualize problems and apply research methods to investigate them. So if you look at yourself in terms of all the categories, first look, do you comply with all of these? Do you have that? So I think it's pretty, there's always people asking, how do I know when I'm ready? I think if you yourself need to judge yourself against that, and also importantly, against the norms in your field. Now, some of the next slide, we have 3 categories, C1, C2, and C3. Which actually you will see in the categories. Basically, a C2 means that all of the 6 reports we have, and there might be one that's a bit of an outlier, so with the exception of no more than 1 single reviewer, everybody's firmly convinced, and you might already have international recognition, just not yet considerable. Then there's 2 ways to become a C1. The third one is actually for people who cannot use the first 2 hurdles, like 2 B reports in a mix of 6, or the overriding majority, which means 80%. So of the 5 of the 6 reports, say you have already sound international, but not yet considerable. So this is the difference between a C2 and a B3 is often 1 report. So it's a kind of like all things are not equal in the C category. But all of them still means you are established. It is just where do you fit into this? Because the C category can be interpreted as a big category, and it's most of researchers on there. But I know for yourself, and I know the institutions themselves also take heed of the sub-levels. Next slide, please. Here is just some examples of the C criteria. This was actually basically how you distinguish between a C report and a Y report and what we call a RU, rating unsuccessful report. Remember, every report is seen on its own. So it is, but your outcome is based on six reports. So this is where the sum and most overriding majority. So if you look at the criterion quality, the descriptor for quality is the ability to conceptualize problems, and there's independence and novelty in your research. You are not just churning out using one cookie cutter and do the same with everybody. There must be some novelty coming out of it. It must create new knowledge. Utilization of appropriate research methods. So for instance, the use of the outdated methodologies is seen to be a serious flaw. The assessment of research findings. You will see in later slides, the reviewers need to have copies of your self-selected best 5 available. And they often would say, have a look at those 5 and look at, because the full, for example, journal article is available to them, and that is for them a proxy of quality, and they often comment on the quality of the research in those best 5. For a C minus, the reviewer might recognize comparatively minor shortcomings, but believes outputs have value and contribute incrementally to new knowledge. This is what research is about. For a report to be categorized as rating unsuccessful, or either for a Y or for a C, it's not placeable in one of the category, the reviewer identifies serious shortcomings in several outputs. Sustainability, it's very discipline specific and or related to complexity of the problem. For example, a seminal book in history might mean you have less articles published, but that book obviously took a lot of time. Or few outputs of exceptional quality in mathematics. So this speaks to how many, and how many is not a cut concept. It's actually based on where did you publish it, what was its value. So if it's published in most of the highest level of journals, the quality is more important than the quantity. Research of acceptable standard and contribute incrementally to new knowledge. It was always said that all research must be of international standards. They must meet this international standards, but your standing is not necessarily the same. So standards and standing is two different concepts. So if output is less than expected of an academic within a discipline, and that is like very important, the discipline focus, it might be a C minus. If output is way less than what can reasonably expected for the discipline, so but it's also in context. So if it's very few articles published, then it might actually be seen as, unless the quality is overriding it. Then coherence and core area, very important as well. It's also discipline specific. The core area can be very narrowly defined in some disciplines and less so in others. Coherence need to be recognized by the reviewer. They often will put it that this, like in the last sentence where it says, the reviewer comments on unfocused, opportunistic research. So anybody that comes for supervision to the applicant is taken up, and in the research outputs, there's no indication of what the researcher's brand or focus is actually. If a reviewer identifies a degree of coherence among some of the outputs but finds vagueness in future direction, and these are very important for the emerging category, it might be a C minus or a Y report. But even for the Ys, you can get an RU if a researcher is not yet having some indication of future research or coherence. Next slide, please.
Joyce, one more question before moving on. There's another question from Reggie. He wanted to know, how does DORA fit into the evaluation process?
Okay, DORA is I know that came up as a, and there is now the Global Research Council that, from my understanding, it basically means that we do not and I think I tried to explain it in the first slide, that we make use of reviewer peer review. So although bibliometrics do feature in some way of substantiating, we are still basically based on a peer review system. So bibliometrics do matter, and I hope that more or less that we do not use bibliometrics, and if a reviewer uses bibliometrics inappropriately, we will actually not take that report into account. But we do, the members of the specialist committees are all working in the field. So in some cases like chemistry or those, they are actually kind of like, they take into account, but it also mentions that we do not actually, for instance, with the IT people, they are very much into Scopus. They would rather take that. But we also do have 5 criteria at play. So quality is seen where you publish, and it might be, the impact might be measured by citations. These are all one of 5 of the criteria. So we want to see around it that the reviewer is actually commenting on all these aspects. So I think that should suffice for now. Okay, so C, again, this is just a mixing of the 2. C, no doubt, so might have international recognition. C, the C1, you might have already some considerable international recognition. C3, minor doubts. B is all of the overriding majority says you have B reports. B3 says some Cs is most. So for the 4 or 6 reports, you might have 4 that says B and 2 C, then you are B3. For the B1, there must be some 2 A's, and the A and A2 is based on the size of the field. Next slide, please. Role players, applicants. They are the most important ones. Everything starts and stops with them. Then we have the designated authorities at the employing higher education institutions, who's an incredibly big play role by helping applicants and also at various levels. Then we have the NRF staff, and in my group it's 10 POs, and we also have GMSA who's supporting with the application, and the Jalka Manela is the person to contact through support desk. Then we have peer reviewers, 60% of them are from outside South Africa. Then we have assessment panels, and the assessment panel have 3 voices. The specialist committee, there's 26 of them, 125 members, and of the 26 committees, specialist committees, they have a convener who's their representative at the panel meeting, which have 3 voices. Then we have 8 assessors and 8 chairpersons, and you will see in the next slide how their role is defined. Higher level executive committees, firstly is the Executive Evaluation Committee. They comprise of all 8 chairs, 2 conveners, 1 representing social sciences and humanities, and 1 the natural sciences. And then we have 3 NRF people that sits on there. The chair of the EEC is Dr. Gansen Pillay, who's currently our acting CEO, but normally our deputy CEO responsible for RISA. We have Dr. Shoes, that is the ED responsible for chairs and SACHI chairs and ECCE, the Centers of Excellence, and my line director, Dr. Rocky Skeef. And then we have an appeals committee, which is totally separate and not the only where the link come, they attend the actual annual EEC workshop, and then they give feedback on their experiences, but they look totally different members. And all these members' names are currently on the website, but they are for last year, but we will soon commence with the replacements of the specialist committees. Next slide, please. Okay, like I said, an assessment panel, we've got 3 voices, specialist committee members, assessor and a chairperson. And I think what this means, which should be reassuring for any applicant, that all members of the panel have to read every report for every applicant. So it is 5 to 8 set of independent eyes that go over every applicant's reports. It is not a question of some of the special committee members work on only those assigned to them. When it comes to the selection of reviewers, they are all assigned applicants that's closest working in their field, but when they actually have to read the reports, they have to read the reports for each and every one. So it is, and they must score and rate and prepare independently. So I think this is part of the checks and balances that it's very, very difficult for, I guess it's almost next to impossible, but impossible we should not say, for any one person to influence the outcome to such a way that you can actually identify that there's always other people that can actually see and call to the whole decision-making process to keep it, that it is done according to the rules and guidelines. The assessor and chair may not be from the same discipline as the specialist committee member. They are normally people that have lots of experience. They've come through the ranks. They were panel members and specialist committee members, and they were conveners normally. So, and then they do, based on their performance in this periods, they are appointed as assessors and chairs. They must attend at least 3 to 4 panel meetings each. Their role is for the assessors to benchmark standards and ensure fairness and consistency in applying criteria. So a C in chemistry and a C in history is the same, and the same rules are applied. The chair's role is the same as a second assessor, but also the facilitate decision-making if there is discrepancies between the two parties, or actually the chair has also a voting role, but they normally try to make sure that they fit into the chair and the assessor and the specials committee, and if not, they actually take serious discussion to get to a consensus rating for that report. Next slide, please. This is just the process, submission of, this is where we are talking about now. Then the screening by designated authorities, DAs at institutions, with a proposed rating. Then when it is screened by GMSA, the panel members are linked to it. And then they start doing scientific screening, but the designated authorities, I know they also have internal processes, so normally a lot of them are already screened out before the time, but even when they come to the panel, it's very important to know whether a person is in the right panel, primary panel. Also, we look especially at the emerging researchers to make sure that they are not wasting an opportunity, to whether they are premature, but it's normally sent back with a good, it's actually already feedback where they see there might be problems, and the prematureness, and with guidance, you can actually say, I would like my application to proceed. Then we approach the reviewers and coordinate, and this is very much led by the POs and the specials committee, as well as the convener, and the process to obtain 6 review reports. These reports are made available to the specials committee members, all panel members, as soon as they come in, so they can, from June onwards, start scoring and rating and do their preparations. So they do that independently. Next slide, please. Then we have the joint meeting. At the joint meeting, they can either allocate a rating communicated by RE to the institution, and that is for the category C, B, and Y. But for the A's and the P's, they need to be ratified with the Executive Evaluation Committee. There can be a case where they just cannot get on to consensus, and then the no consensus cases are referred to the Executive Evaluation Committee. And I proudly can say last year we only had one. So of all 837 that they really had a deadlock. They really tried to do it because the most appropriate place is at the assessment panel meeting. And then we get cases of more reports where there's either not enough, or there is not of the right profile, or the information is conflicting. And then we will inform you we need more reports. So, and this is done virtually, everything's now done virtually. And then after the outcome is sent to the DAs, then the outcome letter with feedback, which is compiled by the specials committee, or a feedback writer, is sent by RE staff. And that is, some of them have been sent sooner, some of them we are still waiting for them, and then there's the appeals process. Next slide, please. Okay, this is if you prepare for Rating Call 2021. There is a lot of stuff which in that 7 steps document we try and make sure that you know why you should read this. First, and all these documents are available on our website. I think it's important to read the definitions of the rating categories to see whether you're ready, and also to look at the eligibility for Y and P. Then, very important, there's a document, key research areas and types of research outputs and boundaries and overlaps. And this you should read in relation to 1, because they will say what type of outputs is important for you, and also for what we talk about considerable international recognition. What do your field or your specialist committee say is considerable international recognition? So considerable international recognition and key research areas, they are living documents, they are annually updated, and they are owned by the scientific community. And I think it's important for you, when you select your panel, to certainly have a look at what would be the most appropriate panel for you. Having your keywords and your specializations and doing a quick search through it will normally tell you where is the most appropriate primary panel. Then the application eligibility types, I think that's an important one to read. And guidelines for selection of reviewers, very important, because this is a peer review system. And then the review response templates, also important to read. And I'll talk in a few slides about these different documents, why, just strengthening why you should read them. Next slide. For instance, on the definitions of rating categories, you can see the expectations, which I've already spoken about in previous slides for the C category. And then also that second page is quite important for YNP eligibility. You will see there and you can judge yourself. So there's two things, 40 years, also 36 years. And then there's also some guide to terminology in the first page. And then the year in which PhD has been obtained is 2015. And if you want to see, this has been quite a lot of confusion often now. How does that mean 5 years? This is how it is actually calculated. So read that at your leisure. Next slide, please. Okay, then the two documents which I think is very important for you. One is the key, I'm just going to refer to it, CRAB and CIR. For you to know, to read it, why it's important, because to know whether you have the relevant outputs of important for the primary panel you have selected. For instance, if you are in history and in IT, you might actually have totally different. IT might have more peer-reviewed IEEE conferences, and there might be actually quite a lot of overlap, for instance, with engineering panel. History might be books and peer-reviewed journal articles. If you are in the engineering field, there's different things. So have a look at all what they consider to be important things, that you make sure that you are eligible for the panel you select. Specialization is very important. These appear in the letter of invitation. Please use the opportunity to make it enticing for the reviewer to open the letter of invitation. Example I had recently came across, the applicant only listed South African literature as her specialization. This went through lots of, and it became curiously why does so many people say no, they are not going to just decline. Then when I actually had a look to see that the person's actual specializations is a lot more. It's colonial cartography, literary tourism, the works of Lewis and Corsi, the works of 19th century Rider Haggard and artist explorers of Thomas Bain. Then all of a sudden, a lot more reviewers actually responded because now they knew what it was around. Our big challenge is that we get all 3 times more emails than normally. We are all much more busier. So for us to get the reviewer to actually read the email, there must be something in it for the reviewer that he might be interested in this. So please make sure you do. Make sure you put up your specializations properly and not just very vaguely. And if you look at your specializations, I had an example of a person giving a lot of information on engineering, and then all of a sudden there was then education put in. And then the species committee didn't know, is this person also focusing on engineering education, or was that just somebody that's trying to improve the way of teaching? So that can lead to the coherence criteria, which is important. Next slide, please. Okay, it also will give you guidance on what type of research outputs you should choose for self-selected best 5. And I think if you look at the second bullet, it's all disciplinary context is important. You must look at the primary species committee when you select it, and they must provide the reviewer with the information on the following rating criteria: quality, sustained engagement. I think, for instance, don't select all from the same year. The coherence and focus. The reviewer should see that there is in your best 5 a theme that's running in them. Your own contribution. If you put up an application or a publication where you were middle author, it was very highly cited, but your contribution was very limited. I think you're wasting an opportunity. it must also give evidence that you are independent, that you are conceptualizing research, that you are not just always middle author. The author sequence do matter. And it might, how come that you must motivate the impact of that publication. So this is your, how you can actually literally try and impress the reviewer. So if you select them well and they are well, and the right copies are attached, this is a very important tool for you to in the whole application process. Next slide, please. Okay, then check the members of the Specialist Committee on the web. They are the ones that are going to select your reviewers using their disciplinary frame of reference. It's obvious. An example is archaeology. We have two overlapping specialist committees that deal with archaeology. One is earth sciences, the other one is anthropology, development studies, sociology, and social work. And they often, you will see who is representing people in that field, and you will know which one is probably the most appropriate for you if you work in archaeology. Each specialist committee has its own definition for the meaning of considerable international recognition. So if you think you are B material, go and have a look what specialist committee you should choose as your primary, and that you are actually fitting your profile. And in the next slides, we'll have some examples of these. Next slide. Okay, guidelines for selection of reviewers, probably a very, very important thing. And this is where you actually have a lot of influence on the process. What we need to be able to make a rating outcome, or we need to, our aim is to have a profile of 6 reports for season-wise, and sometimes even for a B, it's not official, but for an A and a P, it must be 6 reports. But sometimes we have 6 reports for a C or a B, and they are not all of equal quality, but then we will work on 4 reports. They must be of good quality, so meaning that the reviewer must provide informative information. You have often reports that is what we call unusable, because they either are biased or they are actually just not addressing all the issues that they should have. Some people just don't have any qualitative aspects that is mentioned or evaluative. So they maybe just summarize of what the applicant have done. And if the evaluative judgments are made, they must be well supported, and that we consider to be a quality report. In this mix, we want 3 from your nominated list. The applicant may nominate 6 reviewers. We have a 50% decline rate, which I think last year was a bit more because of COVID. So in that profile, we want 3 reviewers that was nominated by you, and we want 3 that was nominated by the specialist committee. So if we have that, and with 6 reports, and their profile is correct, and they all are good, and they sing what we say, sing the same song, then we can make a decision. But so you can actually really influence the process by doing this section well. Pay special attention with your the reviewers you put up their research specializations, and yours are well aligned. Make also sure that they are not collaborators. The specialist committee have the option to say that this person is too close a collaborator, and you'll see in some of my formal slides that follow how they actually could say this would be like the reviewer reviewing himself, and they declined to use that reviewer because they do a search to say, I have this reviewer and you collaborated. So in the application, and it's easy to see there. So next slide, please. What is a peer? A peer is, like I indicate the previous slide, that the specializations appear in the letter to the reviewer. So firstly, specializations matching yours is important. And then secondly, a standing. We are not going to ask a nomination for the Y to be by a leading scholar in the field or a Nobel Prize winner is often used as an example. So there must be some level of criterion that you can say, and you must motivate why you think this person is a peer. Often reviewers are just seen as they must provide a testimonial, and they're not even working in the same field or are academics, and then I think you will have wasted. So 2 things, specializations and standing, and that you should take into account when you nominate reviewers. Next slide. Here's 2 examples, one of how it was done well. This one is interesting. The person's specializations were agriculture, monogastric nutrition, ruminant nutrition, animal production. The reviewers was quite same. This is how it appears on the system at the moment, and is a good match. But the applicant's comments on why this person is a peer reviewer was not very informative. It says basically animal production educator and researcher, which did not actually count many points to make it. And then the whole clincher was this person was rejected because the species committee seen that he had collaborated and co-authored on 41 publications in the period under review. And here we mention number as well as recentness. So if you have done it long time ago, might be, and don't mention it if you put the person up. But also, if you collaborate too many times, the species committee has the right to not approach this reviewer because they do not feel the person will do a good job. Next slide. Here is one where it was done very nicely. Person worked Hebrew language, biblical Hebrew poetry, biblical ancient Near studies. You can see the reviewer had work in the same fields. Not the keywords there is a bit lacking, but if you scroll down a bit, you will see the good motivation. He's the chair of the Department of Hebrew Language and holds the CASPAR. So the person, if the species committee have a look, the panel member assigned to this applicant, they think, oh, this is a very good, this was definitely approached first. And the chance that this reviewer is going to turn up and give a report was, it's actually so much, it's all about the risk assessment. So here, the importance of motivation, why persons appear, and specializations, that's important. Next slide, please. Okay, I see there's a data source to find reviewers. Can I put that up as a question which we'll address a bit later on? Okay. Then the reviewer response template. This is what we ask reviewers. I think it's almost like begin with the end in mind before you start. Remember, the reviewers are asked 2 questions, and every reviewer, no matter which category you are or kind of like signed off for, from C to A to B to Y, are looking at the same template they have to complete. And we actually do not box Ys in, because a person that's eligible for this, the Y category, actually in some cases reviewers might comment on this person already being established. So I think it's important that you begin with the end in mind, read what we ask of the questions of the reviewers. Also make sure that your narratives are providing the information to contextualize the outputs, that you provide a reviewer of all the information they need to be able to make the assessment. For example, the own contribution field is very important. That you attach the correct copies of the applicant's self-selected best 5 is very important. And the way, the best 5, how you must select 5, not less, because if there's less, then it already maybe gives a little bit of, if you don't have 5, why are you ready? And motivate well why they are considered to be your best 5 research outcomes. A big plea, please do not select keynotes or PowerPoint presentations. They are normally seen as, do not select them as your best 5. They are seen as, them like PowerPoint are not peer-reviewed outputs. Normally it is because you've presented it, and that's seen as a testimony to peer recognition, and rather refer to them. Please, you are welcome to put them up as output, but refer to them, explain, expand to them in the narrative sections. Do not put them up as your best 5. And then let's carry on to the next slides. Firstly, yes, Soraya, there must be 5 within that period. Yeah, so there must be 5 from that period. So we will, the best 5 must come from the period under review. So if you look at what is asked of reviewers, especially with regard to the best 5 research outputs, they must show that they have read the best research outputs, which is embedded in the application, either before or after perform the reviewing. They must ask to assist with that, because this gives them information to assist with the quality of the research profile of the applicant. Although they have to read these best 5, we also make double sure that they realize they must assess your full research portfolio, not just the best 5. And that's all in the last 8 years. Next slide, please. The best 5 research outputs, like I mentioned in the previous slide, they are proxies for the quality of your research. If you upload documents, which is not the same, so then it might be, we've had cases last year when a reviewer diligently said, yes, he read the best 5, and then another reviewer came in and said, but he could not because they were not the best 5 that was attached. And there we, in the screening process, made some mistake. So we can then, that first report where he ticked it was actually then not used. I think we had to go back to the reviewer and say, you ticked it, but did you really, or did you get hold of them another way? So I think it's very important that you do make sure that you have them attached. And also I think a big plea, big files, I think more than 4 gigs can be uploaded by a file send. But in most cases, you can actually put your output through a compressor, and they all are, you just go on Google search and say PDF compressor, and they make it smaller for you. And this is often the files that's very big because they've got bells and whistles, hyperlinks and graphs in color. So I think it's probably better not to have those, rather compress them. And then the file send, there's also a plea from JELCA not to send all your stuff, upload them as per normal. Only those that's really big and over 4 gigs that you send them to for the file send facility. Next slide, please. This is just a bit of, this is what your CV entails: registration, contact details, qualifications, career profile, research expertise, personal profile, research outputs, and the primary and secondary and patents. Then you have narrative fields or rating specific fields, which you can only complete after the call has opened. That's additional details and information, and that includes your H-index and all the other types of information. Then the best 5 you can only select after you've migrated all the research outputs, after you created an application. Then the attachments you can also do after that. Then another category that is, you do not have to list your students themselves. You only have to, you've got a narrative field where you can talk about your best research outputs from student supervision in the last 8 years. And then you also have an opportunity to have some outputs, I think up to 10 listed from the previous 8 years. And that actually is a good idea if you have them, to put them up, that you do not look like, especially if you're going for the higher ratings, like you're falling out of nowhere. Then the other important ones is the brief description of completed research, self-assessment of research outputs, and then ongoing and planned future research. These ones are really providing the reviewer with context. So the other 20% in terms of weight and importance, assessment panel, please make sure you select the correct one. You also have an opportunity to indicate that you are working interdisciplinary, and there you can then select up to 3 panels, but in order of priority. And normally there will be a process where the specialist committees discuss amongst themselves, and they look at, for instance, which department you are, where did you publish, to make sure, because this will impact on the reviewers that's selected. And then the possible reviewers, very important, and there's also an opportunity for excluded reviewers. And the important thing, the synergy between the CV information, the information only that you can do after the call has opened, and the above, they actually make, this is the synergy, they must speak to each other. Next slide, please. Okay, personal profile, I think what it says, it's about information not already provided elsewhere. Short overview in terms of your research. I think the emphasis is your research, not your research career. Where you have come from and what you are interested in, and maybe where you are now. Mention should be made of awards and prizes, membership of editorial boards, membership of national and international scientific committees, and any other tangible recognition you have. This will enable reviewers to obtain some perspective on you and to assess your major awards and recognition. So that's the importance of the personal profile. Next slide. Then brief description of completed research. It should be succinctly. I think all of these have got word counts. It should be emphasizing achievements over the last 8 years with reference to the relevant research output listed. And to a certain extent, I think the best 5 is also important. So basically it works on a concise description of the work done and a summary of the results. As you feel it should, so this is your completed research, how you feel, what is of importance. Next slide, please. The one that's always one that people are always a bit wary about is self-assessment, not to blow your horn too loud or too faint. And I think the internal processes is very helpful, because the people that normally help with those are rated themselves and they know, and most of them have been reviewers themselves and they will know how this is perceived. So I think there, please accept help there. So it's about your own contributions to your research field. It's about knowledge being created. It is about in the last 8 years, and the emphasis should be on your contributions listed amongst your best research output, but not limited to it only. It should reflect the development and growth you yourself have seen in the. So this one speaks to a certain extent to your profile, but I think you can make more. Please just don't duplicate the same information in here. And any noteworthy contributions you made to the extension of knowledge in your field. And if you work in groups, make clear the role that you played in the work. And I think there your development also will probably be showing that you were, in some you are maybe just a contributor, and others you are the driver. And then the team effort. I think this is basically the things you should touch on. Next slide, please. Ongoing and planned future research. It's a brief and a narrative on your research vision for the next 6 years. If you have not outputs that not yet published or produced, then you can include and refer to them in the section. And especially for the emerging research categories, this is very important that you fill this in well, because this forms part of how they judge potential. Next slide, please. Okay, now a very important one, the own contribution. This field is very important, only become available after your application has been created. You can do your CV, but it will only migrate through and become when you have created a rating application. I know we all encourage you to keep your CV updated, but this part, and it also will prevent you from submitting your application at the end to your DA if these are not all filled in. Here's some examples, what you can use. And it's important to note that it's information that the reviewer needs, because it's an individual within a context that's looked at. Do not just put percentages if these multi-authored ones. And if you look down at the bottom of the slide, it's also important that you do not just cut and paste, because it leads to less credibility of your contribution to the outputs. Next slide, please. Just a summary, I think is just everything that the applicant should look at. The narrative field is very important for context, and that supports the CV. Your self-selected best 5, it's a proxy for the quality of your portfolio, and you must correct the correct attachments, not keynotes, and make sure they are aligned with the key research areas document. Please attach the correct copy of the self-selected best 5. Make sure that you selected the most appropriate primary panel, or the 3 of them if you feel that it might be either one of them, and motivated peer status of those that you nominate, and your own contribution, make sure you do it well to give the reviewer that information. Next slide, please. This is just the 7 steps, update CV, and then you can do this anytime. But you can also do it, I think you can create the application and then go on, and because then they will automatically migrate the information from what you have on the CV. Add your own contribution for multi-authored outputs. Complete the narrative fields. It's probably best to do them offline on MS Word, that you can do word count and also kind of like polish it. You select the best 5, put the care that it requires in, attach the copies of the best 5, and step 6 is very well explained how you should do it, and then select primary panel and reviewers, which is also step 7. Next slide, please. Checklist. I think check your eligibility, make sure that for the eligibility type, the duals, and I think those will already, there's very much system driven, but if you are shown you already you have a rating and it doesn't allow you to select revaluation by invitation or special, then you must actually log a call about that. Your contract positions, if that's, especially if it's your primary position, there should be an end date. It's often a thing that trips you up if you have not updated your information on the CV section, and it tells you now you are not eligible because your primary position is not, as already shown, you are no longer, so you're not eligible. It should show that your association will be in place within 2 years after the rating become valid, and this is DA must sign off if it's a contract position, so the motivation must come in there. And we also check this before the rating outcome is sent, contract position, that the person is still at the institution. Next slide. If you make use of the special revaluation, make sure the motivation, it must be convincing. We have, it must show really that your current status is quite out of sync and really out of sync with the existing one. And if you are going to apply new next year, I actually should probably warn you, I think it's probably better to wait till you have, because it's often big seminal books that make that change in your standings, not just the number of articles. Some sobering information or facts, less than 10% of these applications result in the category increase. We have some last year that got downgraded. And the species committees are wary to undertake this because they say it just adds to reviewer fatigue. If you've more recently been and you ask now for a special revaluation, reviewers often ask now why do they get approached again. Next slide. Best 5, please make sure this is 5 and not less, might show prematurity. Best 5 outputs. PDFs, please. MS Word's not good. PowerPoint's not good. Books, you can actually get the ebook e-version from the publisher in most cases. We had situations like that last year. These music scores, framing documents, so those probably, but also PDF, the framing documents, I think it is just, MS Words, it does not reflect well. Make sure you can, these best 5 open. Make sure you test it after they've been embedded. Make sure it correlates the naming of this relates to 3 fields or 3 places. Actually, on the output record, the name of the journal and the title of the article. Then you have the attachment that you uploaded in step 6. And if these 3 are nicely synchronized, it makes everybody's job to make sure that if you open it, that you can actually see it's the correct best 5 output. Make sure that it is already, that this, if the best 5 is printed, and I think, or published, make sure that it falls in the period under review. Often you get stuff that is the official printing published date will be in 2021, but the DOI which made it was already available in the public domain in 2020. So as long as it's in that digital object identifier, and you must, that's also a compulsory field that you actually put that in. unless it's not available. But you can use that to see that it's in the period under review. Next slide. Okay, the own contribution, I think of not just a percentage, and just a reminder, you will not be able to press final submit. In all author sequence, make very sure that it is it having a different disciplinary context, different meanings, but the reviewer will know that. If it is incorrectly captured, the reviewer will question it. So it must be exactly in the order on the published research output. And please do not use, when you, there is a format that is prescribed, do not use the ampersand sign and do not use carriage returns, because it makes the application look not so neat and is confusing. Next slide, please. Okay, this is just from experience last year. Make sure you have these various PDFs that you can, after when you final submit it, make sure you have the most up-to-date version, that you can keep it, because we had a contestation last year of people that see the DAs did not submit the correct one, and that was kind of like an issue that was, I see there's a question from about the 2012 digital object identifier. Okay, I'll attend to that. Next slide, please. Things we're struggling a bit with, screening. This is very important that we do not, we really want to have every application that goes out to peer review to have the most, a best fighting chance, and actually also that it presents and look good for the South African research community. The eligibility, we have the Rente A, where we have people whose affiliation is very loose, and the postdocs is, I try to explain, postdoc is a designation, but it must be contextualized. We often give the same instructions to reviewers, and some of them respond well, and others actually do write very poor reports. We are in the process of moving to an ERP, so we were not allowed to make any changes to the current one, which is a very outdated format. The interdisciplinary research, our way of dealing it is to make sure that it's the most appropriate, and there is ways to deal with, we've got some strategy how to deal with that. Then we have people that actually, if a person had a glorious career but are now moving into the twilight zone, reviewers tend to still write as if to write and give a report that is not just based on the last 8 years, and to actually tease that out is often a difficult one. The use of predatory journals, it's a very difficult one, in the sense that there's no list that tells you which are on or which are off. There's often reference made to the accredited list, but we're talking about the 8-year period. And at the moment, we asked both the Specialist Committee to look for that, and we also asked for them to look at, the reviewers are asked to look at that. So they make us aware. How the Specialist Committee look at it, because we don't actually know, we don't have a Beals list anymore. If it's sometime on the accredited list, some journals go rogue, or they were rogue at a certain time. So whether they were predatory or not, you cannot say. But one of the most interesting issues is that the Specialist Committee and the assessment panel look at patterns. The surest way often is to see that the person had a good profile, 2-3 publications per year, and then all of a sudden it jumped up. It was normally around 2014 there, before all the awareness came into being. A person have 20 outputs in the same journal, and I think if you go, you will most certainly find that was a predatory journal. We also just remember predatory journals is basically the quality criterion, refers to the outlets you use. And we do know that there is some people who were actually making a mistake, was not well advised. But if you really shown intent, this is how it is looked at. Then the YNC report, I think we've addressed that. Ethics, we had cases where the reviewers and the applicant do collude, and the report is so similar that the only conclusion you can get is that the reviewer was contacted by the applicant, or the applicant contacted the reviewers and provided them with some kind of like a template to use. And then we will look at fairness of the rating system. We know that the medical field, they don't usually have PhDs, so they normally are not eligible for the Y category. Whether people have family responsibility issues, how we deal with that, and changes in research focus. Next slide, please. I think that's the last slide. Okay, that's just the website you can go. Next slide. And this is also the people you can contact if you have and what they are responsible for. And I think that is everything. We still have some. Okay, there was one question about the data of the reviewers. Okay, and then the other one was, can you include output whose DOI says 2012? I think in that situation, I would use the 2012. I would use the published data. Use it to your advantage, because the fact that it was published in 2013, you can actually put it on there. I think it is on both ends of the term covered. You must use it to the best advantage. If you want to include a 2012 one with DOI 2012, but it's a good important one for you and it was published, I think you should focus on the date of publication of the journal, and because the publication date is often different. I think the importance about it is to make sure that it's in the public domain. So for the 2021, it might actually be, if you want to put that in as one of your publications cutoff date, so I think use it to your advantage. Then the one about the reviewers, what you must do is you must, when you select your best or your own reviewers, what you need to do is you must first find out whether they are already registered on the NRF database. And if they are not, you can actually put in a request that the person you put in some, you can actually register them on there. But it's important first to make sure that the person is not already there. And I think, Rushan, maybe you are probably quite aware how it works on when you do those, maybe some input from your side as well. Any more questions?
Joyce, there's a question on UCT Libraries assist academics by preparing bibliometric reports. What is the weight given to these reports in the NRF rating?
I think this very much goes with the DORA statement. We use it as supplementary. Not we don't even use it at all. It forms part of the NRF. When you open a rating call, that you must put it, what was your H index and at that date. So it's important there that you put it in there and reviewers actually have a look at it. But my experience is that reviewers actually themselves go and look it up, and if it's not correct, or it's sometimes they go and look it up, whether it's self citations or whether it's own citations, and they comment on that. So, but still, it's about peer reviewers, and peer reviewers, what is there, they use that as something to substantiate stuff. I think it's also the whole idea of the best. Sorry, I lost my track now there. I meant to say something. Rushan, just repeat your question, and I'll get back to that. Just repeat the question that you had about the librarians. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted to say. If you're going to use the CV Sync story, you actually make sure your Scopus profile is very updated, as well as your what you call it, your Clarivate and that one. Because if those are updated, it's going to impact your H factor as well as your Scopus index, as well as your Clarivate Scopus or Scala index. So it's important for two different ways. I think people in the library should help people to make sure their profiles is updated on both Scopus and on, I don't know what's Clarivate, the other one. So that if they decide to use their, firstly, to make sure their indexes are correct, and secondly, to ensure that if they do the syncing of the CV sync the ORCID profile. ORCID profile is also dependent on having correct information available. So I think in that respect, this is as much as possible how they are used.
There's another question. Can establishing an academic journal or research unit be considered as a research output?
Unfortunately, not an output, but you can certainly put that in your narrative fields, because I think what it means is people place trust in you. Your journal will not be accepted if it's not run by people. So it's a sign of I think recognition that your peers consider you to be important. So, but you must refer to it in. It's not an output. So the only outputs are the ones that are listed. The next one.
I think the next question is maybe more for research office. Maybe Rashan wants to answer. Please clarify the role of the DA, the steps in submitting to DA, and the sign off from them before submitting online.
All right, so the designated authority, that is myself, when doing a NRF rating application or any NRF application, the researcher will never ever directly to the, will never submit directly to the NRF. It will come to the research office. We will then we'll be able to open it. We will normally review it and we will give feedback. And once you, in terms of the NRF rating deadline, the final deadline to submit applications is on the 1st of March. By then all applications must be in, and it will then be checked further by the designated authority, which is myself and Jackie, basically the support team. And then we will submit on the researcher's behalf the application directly to the NRF. So we sort of, there's like a middle ground. So the researchers should always be liaising with us because, you know, we sort of control that final submission to the NRF. And we also open applications if you want to add anything or amend anything.
So it's not in the NRFs until the closing date after the DA. So anytime before then, you actually just contact your DA if you want to open it, or because I think they will, but your contact person should be your research office.
Yeah, there are some cases where maybe a researcher hears about the prize that they got, and it's maybe late, and we will open it for you. I had a situation in the last cycle where one of our researchers got a very, he had a huge accolade, and I contacted the NRF about it, and they actually opened it so that he could attach it to his application. So those are rare cases, but contact Jackie or myself, and we can take it from there. We could talk about it further.
And I concur with the chat that came up that Rushan and Jackie's really, they are the best. They are very responsive, and you will remember they also rely on other faculty structures and to help. But in terms of if you have a problem, please contact them. They really are good.
Thank you, Joyce. There seems to be no more questions.
My apologies for starting late, but I think we actually kept to our time, apart from starting late. And I want to thank you very much, and looking forward to see your names when we deal with the next year's applications.
Thank
this
you
year's
so much,
applications. So
thank you, Joyce, and thank you for everyone for attending. If there's any further questions, you could always email us, or you can still put it in the chat. There is still some time.
Thanks a lot.